Hey guys, so last week we talked about strong versus weak evidence. Today we're going to continue with that idea, but we're going to learn how to cite our evidence and use it in our writing. Our goal for today is we will cite textual evidence to support our ideas. What we're going to do is we're going to look for some strong evidence in a very short passage, and then Ms. M's going to show you how to basically write it on your paper in the correct format. So I need you to take out a sheet of paper and go ahead and title it Citing Textual Evidence. This is where we're going to take notes. So if you need to pause the video to take your notes and then just listen, I think that would be a great thing to do. So what is textual evidence? Textual evidence is the use of anything from the text to support your answer. It's a direct quote, it's examples, it can be dialogue. A lot of people tend to get confused when I say direct quote, because when you think of quoting, you think of quoting what someone's saying. But when we're using evidence from a text, when you use a quote, you're quoting what the author wrote. So it's anything in the text can be used as a quote. So when we use evidence in our writing, it adds concrete examples, provides support to back up your answer, and it helps explain your reasoning and thoughts. Remember, if you have an answer and you don't have evidence, you don't have a very strong point because you're usually just giving your opinion. If you can support your opinion with facts from the text or whatever you're reading, it usually makes it a little bit stronger. Now most of you must be wondering, but Miss M, where do I begin? Like, how do I figure out what to write down? So of course you need to read the question or identify our purpose for reading before we start reading. Then you should obviously read the passage. We're going to answer a question, reread or skim to identify strong evidence. And then finally, we're going to learn to copy evidence word for word and give credit to the author. Before we start citing evidence, we have to first read and have an answer to a question to pick out evidence to support our answer. So we're going to read a short excerpt and identify evidence to support our answer. Our purpose for reading, or our question, is what is the problem in this story and how do we know? So as Miss M's reading to you, I want you to think about what's the problem in the story and what made you think about that. Remember, our purpose for reading is what is the problem in the story and how do we know? So follow along as I read to you. Check the map again, will you? Prompted Jim as he glanced at the rearview mirror to switch lanes. Paul shot him a devilish glare. I know how to read a map, Jim, he snapped. I'm not saying you don't know how to read a map. I'm just asking you to check again, just in case. Paul sighed deeply and pulled a crumpled paper from the glove compartment. It says, he emphasized, that after getting off the interstate, you turn left and go straight for 5 miles. That's impossible. We've gone 10 miles by now. Let me see it. Now that we've read the text, we need to go back and answer our question. Our question was, what is the problem in the story and how do we know? Well, while I was reading, I realized that the boys were arguing with one another. Something wasn't right. Paul was getting upset because Jim didn't know how to read a map. So I can infer that the boys are lost. Now that I know the boys are lost, I need to go back into the text and find evidence that will support my answer. So as I was reading, down towards the bottom, if I skim, it says, Paul sighed deeply and pulled a crumpled paper from the glove compartment. It says, he emphasized, that after getting off the interstate, you turn left and go straight for 5 miles. I think this is pretty important, so I'm going to underline it really quick. Alright? But once I have that, it's not really necessarily the strongest evidence because it doesn't say or show us that the boys are lost. Instead, I have to continue highlighting down here where Jim says, that's impossible, we've gone 10 miles by now, let me see it. The reason this makes it stronger is because of this first part I underlined tells us that, they're looking at a map and like the directions, and then when Jim talks down here, it tells us that they've made a mistake. So we can infer or assume that the boys are lost. Now that I've read and found my answer and underlined my evidence, I can transfer it to paper. So I know the 2 boys are lost. And my evidence is, it says he emphasized that after getting off the interstate, you turn left and go straight for 5 minutes. That's impossible. We've gone 10 miles by now. Let me see it. And at the bottom down here, you'll see my inference. It's like my guess based on what I read and the evidence I have. It says Jim was worried that Paul misread the map, so he asked him to check it. When Paul checked the map, Jim realized that they had already gone too far. This shows that the boys are lost. So what I want you to notice and take away from this is that when I insert my evidence or when I write my evidence on paper, I copy it word for word. I also included things like quotation marks, like right here. And then down here I have a comma, quotation mark, and then I put the page number. So you should have received the Gathering Textual Evidence paper on Thursday in class. If you have lost it, I'm going to attach it to the Google Docs for our class and you can print it out yourself. But in the instructions it says, use the chart below as we read in this unit. You should collect evidence that helps support your answer to our essential question. If you forgot, our essential question is, in a culture where we are bombarded with ideas and images of what we should be, how does a person form an identity that remains true and authentic to him or herself? So if we look at our chart here, or our table, you'll notice the first columns for the title, the author, and the page number. This is important when citing evidence. So this is kind of like our note sheet for when we have our writing task at the end of the 9 weeks. So I have the title, I have our author, and I have our page number. And then right here, I have detailed evidence, and it's what the text says. I copied it word for word. This is evidence that helps me support my answer. It says, what I read about those days is that I couldn't throw a ball where it was supposed to go, I couldn't learn to swim, and I wouldn't learn to ride a bike, because no matter what anyone told me, I knew I'd fail. So, things I want you to notice in this evidence is that I included again the quotation marks right here, before and after the first word and last word, and then inside the last quotation mark I put a comma. Okay, so the comma goes inside, not the period. The period actually goes after the page number. Alright? What I want you to do on your own is I want you to fill in the I know part. So what do you know about this topic? And then I want you to make an inference. Okay, so your understanding of the evidence and how it relates to or supports the essential question. So kind of like I did on the last part on the paper, you kind of make the connections. It's kind of like connecting the dots. And then down here on the second piece of evidence, I'd like you to correct the format of the evidence. Remember, the things you need are quotation marks, a comma, the page number, and a period. So I would like you to put those in the correct spots. And again, I'd like you to add the I know and an inference. And finally, one last thing. I want you to go back to your passage. And I want you to find one more piece of evidence that you could use to support our essential question above. If you have any questions, make sure you email me or message me on the classroom.